Welcome to another tidbit from the Acts of the Apostles. We have arrived in the second to last chapter, chapter 27. In many ways, Acts of the Apostles is an itinerary. It's a book about traveling. The outline of the book brings us from Jerusalem through Judea and Samaria to the end of the world. And this particular chapter also takes us from Jerusalem and almost to Rome. We arrive only in Rome in the last chapter, in the following chapter, chapter 28. There is no doubt when you read this story that Luke enjoys telling the dramatic events at sea. Of all the stories in Acts, this is the most detailed. So why is it told? Why does it draw out? Now, first of all, Greek literature abounds in sea voyages. Is this just another story? Is Luke simply taking a story and putting Paul's name into it? Now, if it was only a story, you could wonder why would he not add some of the typical elements of such stories? No pirates show up, and Paul is actually not a divine man who's performing miracles. The miracles performed are miracles performed by God. So why the story the way it is told? And the answer to that is that Luke, by telling this story the way he does, illustrates that God has the power to overcome every enemy who rises to stop him. Nothing can hinder his plans or purposes, and in particular in this context, his intention to allow Paul to speak before Caesar and bring the gospel to Rome. Throughout Acts, many enemies have tried to quench the gospel. Some of these enemies were human powers, certainly, but behind their activities, we always see the hand of Satan. With the powers of the sea, readers of the time, Jews as well as Greeks, would perceive Paul to face the most dangerous of all possible enemies. The sea and its deep was tremendously feared and represented death itself. You can look up yourself, Psalms 69, 14, 15, 88, 4-6, among others. Victory over the enemy of the deep, the abyss, was only achievable through the power of God, the God of heaven himself. This is an enemy God has overcome before, like in the Exodus story. So the message here is that the God who raised Jesus from the grave was more than able to save his servants when they faced even the most deadly enemy known to people of the time. In this way, the salvation of Paul through the perils at sea also becomes an illustration of how the risen Lord has protected him on his previous journeys and how God helps to overcome all obstacles for the proclamation of the gospel, also in the future. And with this introduction, let's look at some of the tidbits. We cannot cover them all because this is, as already said, a very, very long and dramatically told story. But let's read in chapter 27 from verse 4. They were putting out to sea and sailed under the lee of Cyprus because the winds were against us. When we have sailed across the open sea along the coast of Cilicia and Pamphylia, we came to Myra in Lycia. There the centurion found a ship of Alexandria sailing for Italy and put us on board. Now, the person mentioned here, the centurion, his name Julius, was in charge of a large group of prisoners, most of them common prisoners, but among them a more respectable Roman citizen named Paul, and then there were those who volunteered to follow along with Paul to care for him, among them Lucas, the writer. Remember, somebody had to care for the prisoners for food and everything else, otherwise they didn't get much. Now, this was not a prisoner ship. They had to board normal trading ships. They had found a ship going to the western coast of Asia, and they ended up in Myra. And Myra was close to a harbor city, Andriache, located 5 kilometers or 3 miles east of Myra, and which was a central port for shipment of grain from Egypt to Italy and Rome. A little word about that. Egypt had become the private property of the emperor during the reign of Augustus, whereby the provision of grain from the fertile and prosperous fields along the Nile went for Italy and not least for Rome's growing population. A typical voyage from Alexandria in Egypt to Rome would take around 50 days. Now, in Myra, Julius found a ship coming from Alexandria and sailing from Italy, and he made them all embark the ship. This would have been a large ship. There were 276 people aboard, we are told. So that could have been a ship up to 100 feet, maybe 45 meters long, able to carry a weight of close to 1,200 tons. We know that such ships existed. The Jewish writer Josephus actually was a shipwreck, and on the ship where they could be up to 600 people. That is what he mentions. Now then they were sailing off, and the normal sailing season would be from May 26 to September 14. After that it would be extremely dangerous. However, the profit was enormous, so in this case some would try to get an extra shipload from Alexandria to Rome even late in the season, and that is what happens here. Now, I will not go into all of the details. There are many nautical details in the story that are certainly confirmed. All the nautical descriptions are spot on. Luke knows what he is writing about. Now, one place that is mentioned in verse 17 would deserve a detailed explanation. They were moving along from Crete, and then the storm would take them. There was what is called a northeasterner. And this expression is a typical nautical term for a specific sort of storm or wind that would here come down from the Ida Mountains on Crete. The word northeasterner is a composite, a hybrid, with the Latin and the Greek phrase combined, and it is attested in ancient sources. And then they fear that they are going to the place called the Syrtis. This is today the Gulf of Sidera, that at the time along the coast of Cyrenaica was considered extremely dangerous. It was an extensive zone of shallows and quicksands and formed a notorious navigation hazard. It inspired an obsessional fear constantly mentioned in first century literature, is one commentator's words. Now, Paul is given a word from God that all the people, all the souls on board will be given him. Nobody will die. And though first the seamen, later the soldiers tried to kill the prisoners, the sailors indirectly, the soldiers directly, they all are saved. One episode deserves mention in the end of this Tidbits. In the midst of the story, we are told in verses 33 and onwards that Paul urged them all to take some food. They had not been eating for a while because of fear, because of the storm and so on. He was saying, today is the 14th day that you have continued in suspense and without food, having taken nothing. Therefore I urge you to take some food, for it will give you strength, for not a hair is to perish from the head of any of you. And when he had said these things, he took bread, and giving thanks to God, in the presence of all, he broke it and began to eat. Then they were encouraged and ate some food themselves. First of all, of course, breaking bread is not the same as the Eucharist or the Lord's Supper. This is simply what Paul would do as a Jew before eating. But the encouragement to eat is a positive statement of hope. And Paul here gives the prisoners and all the sailors and all on board hope, because God has told him that he will be saved, and along him with him all that are on board. So they are saved, and they end on an island. We will get to that story when we get to the last tidbit from Acts next time.